Hello everybody, and welcome to everyone online as well. My name's Anita and I'm headquartered in the WHO's headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. As you might know, WHO is quite a big organisation. We have over 300 people working in the Department of Regulation and Pre-Qualification, but I specifically work in the team that deals with substandard and falsified medical products. So I have to declare my bias that whenever I talk about traceability and supply chains, this is my main focus. Also have to declare that my work is more related to medical devices, but I do lead the work that we're doing on traceability overall. So I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about traceability and supply chains in the global sense, as WHO is a global organisation. And I think that there's probably nothing here on this slide that's unusual or a surprise to you all. But certainly as we globalise, supply chains get more and more complex, and therefore the need for forms of traceability become more and more important. We know this more than ever during COVID-19, where we were trying to move products from country to country all over the world, and we had interruption to supply chains. And so that certainly made us think about how can we best serve our markets. The impact of e-commerce is something that's really important to reflect on. It has its role in some places for certain types of products, maybe lower risk products, but increasingly it's a place for you to be able to access just about anything. So in terms of traceability for medical products, there's a lot of opportunities, but also some challenges. And as I mentioned at the start, I'm always going to talk about falsified medical products, but we really see that traceability is a way to prevent those products even entering the regulated supply chains. A little bit more difficult on the unregulated and informal markets, but that's a whole another piece of work that we do work on. Not only does it prevent, but it can also help to detect falsified medical products. On the substandard side of products, it can enhance patient safety because you have a better ability to do recalls at the batch level if you identify as a supplier or a manufacturer that there's a problem with the product. The points about supply chain efficiency and visibility, I won't speak as much about those, but obviously that's a really important reason why many stakeholders want to introduce traceability. We're looking at procurement and distribution partners. A lot of our UN sister agencies such as UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA are very interested in ensuring supply chain efficiency for products that they're procuring and helping to prevent shortages and stockouts, because that can lead to the propensity for substandard and falsified products to be re-entering the supply chain when there's a shortage. That really does drive the demand for falsified products. Of course, there are many challenges, and the main one is resources. It's human as well as financial and technological. And so I think that's really important from WHO's point of view, is thinking about what sort of guidance do we need to give to our member states. What is these three different aspects of resources are important. Interoperability, we talk as a global organisation, but we're aware that at the regional and national level there may be other systems and organisations or some such. And we're okay that that happens, but we just want to make sure that we have interoperability between the work we're doing. And so we don't preclude there being national systems for traceability, but there definitely needs to be an interoperability, as we mentioned, with the supply chains being more and more that we're exporting and importing. Obviously, data security and data governance are really important elements of traceability, and it's perhaps one of the parts that can be a bit, I would say, off-putting. It's really something that WHO, we want to strive to support member states on. Mainly on the industry side, you're the ones that will be able to put data carriers and the data exchange and lead a bit on this. But at the country side, how do we ensure they have the adequate data collection systems, that they're able to maintain that data security that's really needed? So in terms of the different use cases, I guess this is sort of a slide that I often give, is to say that, yes, obviously it's really important for our piece of work on preventing, detecting and responding to SF medical products and some of these elements around patient safety for recalls and maintaining supply chain integrity. But it's also got really important roles for pharmacovigilance and for reimbursement. I won't go as much into those, but I just want to highlight that these are, in some countries, it may be that reimbursement is the main reason, the main use case. And we certainly know in pharmacovigilance that there's a lot of emerging work that also came out of COVID-19 with trying to be able to better trace adverse events to particular lot numbers. And so traceability really benefits a whole range of stakeholders. I'm going to deep dive now into the strategy that WHO has around prevent, detect and respond. You might hear me say this many times, and it's almost in a way a mantra. It's a way of us looking at how do we support member states on this piece of work. And we see mostly you might start off with just responding. You've seen a falsified product and you respond and go, okay, we've got to do something about this. But we want to be able to evolve that and make sure that member states have the potential to be preventing it as those kind of products even entering their markets, and obviously being able to detect when it does come to the market. And so we have a bullseye here on the right side. Yep, your right side. And it sort of unpacks some of the necessary elements, and this helps to guide the work that we do. I'll kind of go in a little bit more detail about each. So in terms of prevention, we really think that having adequate legal provisions is one of the most important foundations for ensuring the supply of good quality products, and also being able to act when there's a substandard or a falsified medical product. The other part of the prevention element of our framework is also around supply chain security measures, and that's exactly why we're here. So I see traceability important for all three pillars, but really on the prevention, and this is some of the work that we've added into the toolkit, is around good distribution practices for pharmaceutical products, and really seeing that this is a very important element that regulators need to be capacitated on, and this is part of, we're actually updating this part of the toolkit, and there are a lot of other great resources from other organisations as well. And being able to make sure that in the supply chain, if you do detect products that you suspect, that they can be actually secured or even quarantined. In terms of detection, a lot of regulators, market surveillance is really one of the principal kind of obvious, when I say regulatory actions they might do, is where they're sampling products from user facilities or other parts of supply chain and conducting testing. It's also risk-based inspection of distribution partners and manufacturers, and being able to test samples, either those that they might suspect to be substandard falsified, or a more routine where it is a proactive sampling and it might be based on the risk. And we're actually developing some WHO normative guidance because we do have a lot of WHO guidance in lots of different places, and we want to bring this all together. And we really think that market surveillance is a key part of supply chain integrity. Looking at having import controls at borders. As I mentioned, these more complex supply chains, product moving across borders, maybe it's more by sea or by land or by air, depending a bit on the geography, but making sure that customs officers and border officials are aware of what to look for, and we really want to actually capacitate them to have handheld or very simple to use detection technologies. And that's another part of the APEX supply chain toolkit that we're involved in updating, is the section on detection technologies. Of course, if you do detect something, you've got to report it. And this can be something that in some countries is much clearer pathway than in others. But certainly users, and when I say users, I'm thinking maybe more in the medical devices, someone's using the product, but it might be a pharmacist, might be someone in supply chain that notices that there is something unusual about the product they've received, making sure that they're reporting it to the appropriate stakeholder. definitely the manufacturer, but also to regulators. And the regulators being the ones that would evaluate or take the actions, and then reporting to WHO's global surveillance and monitoring system, which Lee's already mentioned. In terms of response, so we're up to pillar 3 of the 3. We're very interested in how we can better respond, how we can better engage communities. We've just undergone in the last 2 years some very high-profile cases related to the contamination of liquid medicines with diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol. And unfortunately, that resulted in the deaths of more than a few people in a few different countries. And what we noticed in this piece of work was that we were really good at communicating with each other, so other regulators or other manufacturers or supply chain partners, but we weren't as good as, we didn't have targeted materials for how we actually engage the community and make them aware of the risks. A lot of pharmaceuticals and medical products are bought over the counter, such as the syrups that we were dealing with, and we often think, oh, prescription medicines, controlled medicines, these are the higher risk products. Well, in this point, in this case, it really was over the counter. And so through this, we engaged with the team in WHO that deals with risk communication, community engagement in our emergencies program. And we're actually working with them to develop a toolkit. The purple document there, that's actually what they've just developed for MPOX, and it'll be modelled on that. But it's how do we bring these stakeholders and help them to be part of the process, but also to reassure them, as they're one of the key stakeholders. They take the medicines, or if they're a parent, they buy them for their children. And so we just think this is a piece that's really important. Effective product recalls, we're drafting, as I said, this bigger WHO normative guidance on market surveillance and control, and we're going to update some of the work there. Rapid alert systems, I already sort of foreshadowed the fact that we really want national stakeholders to be reporting, but we have also various regional opportunities. And I know I've just put the abbreviations here, but that's because I didn't want to crowd the slide. So WEGIO, the first one, is in Europe. It's the Working Group of Enforcement Officers. They're one of the stronger reporters to WHO's GSMS. That means whenever there is a recall or a falsified product, they circulate a rapid alert within that network. They copy it to us as WHO and we add it to our global system. CARPHA is the Caribbean Public Health Agency, and they actually coordinate alerts on behalf of the entire Americas region for us. And then we have here in the Asia-Pacific region, ASEAN, who also has a rapid alert system. So any ASEAN member economies will be familiar with that system. And then, as we mentioned, the WHO alert. So we have this national, regional, and global. And we think that's important because some responses might only need to be at the national level. Some may only need to be at the regional level. And then there are some where the product is found in more than one country. That's when one of the criteria that WHO would use to issue a global alert. If it's just in one country and we can support one country, we'd leave it at national level. So we're also trying to be proportionate in our response. And the other big document you have there is a collaboration that we have in terms of enforcement. This is with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, the UNODC. And this is a document that they've put out related to good legislative practices, particularly for falsified medicines. And with all of this, if you become better in detecting issues with supply chain integrity, you'll have to enforce more penalties. And the more you did, so you actually generate a lot more work for yourself. And so it's really important that you can adequately enforce, you can establish what are the penalties and bring these cases to court and make sure, because for falsified it's absolutely of criminal intent. For substandard, it might be not always the case, but for falsified you can always make the case. And at global level, what we want to do is support countries, member states, to work perhaps cross borders to be able to identify the perpetrators of falsified medicines crime. It is a crime, and people are affected by it. So it's really important to make sure that that's not forgotten as a consequence of everything we're doing. So then to come back to traceability, there are many good examples, and I've tried to focus a bit more on what we have here in the region. I know here in Korea you have quite an advanced system for prescription medicines. The traceability in Turkey is very well known, very much linked to the use case of reimbursement, because they have a very strong reimbursement system, and they've used traceability to help make that more efficient. Argentina and China are also some of the early adopters of traceability, and the European Union, which has actually more of a verification model, and the US, as Lee just mentioned. And I think these last two models are interesting because they are less of a government stakeholder model and more of a mixed or other stakeholder model, and that might help when it comes to resourcing of a project. And the EU in particular, they have certain elements of data protection and data governance, which means that although they have a regional system at the European level, the data is actually held in the national repositories. And so there are some interesting lessons, I think, there. But when we look at all of it, like what are the drivers of success? It's about having a strong legal framework. So the US and the EU in particular, there were legislation or regulations that were promulgated, and then the stakeholders came together to develop organisations or associations or systems that would help to enact, so it would help to implement. And I think that that's an important way of seeing it. Also phasing in the approaches. I think that it's overwhelming to think you would all of a sudden do all of the medical products. You see many countries are starting more with prescription medicines or targeted over-the-counter in Argentina. Maybe countries might start with controlled medicines or other sorts of products that they think might be the ones that are most likely to be diverted. But I think in all of this, what we see is stakeholder engagement, and really this meeting here today is another example of stakeholder engagement, bringing everybody together to understand how we implement traceability. So from WHO's point of view, we're looking to see, well, where can we be of most help? And so we've just done a survey which will be published hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm sorry it couldn't be published by this meeting. I tried quite hard, and it will be available on, and this is actually a hyperlink to the health topic on SF medical products on the WHO webpage. What we did was we surveyed all member states. We didn't get a response from all member states. We got a reasonably good response rate, and we're looking to see what's the primary, if you've implemented a traceability system or you're planning to, what is the primary purpose? And for those of you that can't read at the bottom, supply chain security and oversight was mentioned by at least 10 member states, 10 countries. So you see that really does mean it's a priority, and we also see recalls and withdrawals, real-time product tracking, and I think that's some good data. We'd like to be able to kind of keep repeating these surveys and over time start to see more and more information to help us understand where we might need to support. But what we do know is that a lot of the challenges, there's also a question on challenges, a lot of it's around technology. I'm really happy to be here in Korea and to see the amount of tech, and I hope that we can have some really good innovation around the technology that you need at the different ports of entry, distribution centres, remote pharmacies. It's not always the capital cities where we're doing this work. Obviously technical knowledge and funding. I'm just going to talk a little bit about one solution or one innovation that at the UN level, it's actually my cousins, sisters, brothers over in UNICEF that have been leading this, along with Gavi, which is the Global Vaccine Initiative, the Global Fund, USAID, the United States government, and also Nigeria, Rwanda, and Gates Foundation. And this is about looking at how we maybe can support national traceability systems, but in a global sense. And this came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. It came out of these agencies supplying COVID-19 vaccines and wanting to have an idea of where the vaccines went. There was a lot of taxpayer money and wanting to make sure that the vaccines went to the right place. And so the Traceability and Verification Initiative was conceived, and its main purpose, as you can see, is to detect and reduce falsified, well, it should be medical products in low and middle income settings. and secondarily to enhance supply chain visibility. So it is a platform, and we're working with they're working with a number of countries. Nigeria and Rwanda are the first kind of early adopters, but we also have Ethiopia, we have Zambia, Ghana and Nepal are all in fairly advanced stages of using this system. Now, it's primarily been used for vaccines, and UNICEF was an ideal partner as they procure something like 75 to 80% of the vaccine market in the public sector and low and middle income settings. And they were able to they got a lot of lawyers in to make sure that data governance and data protection elements were solid, and so that meant that a manufacturer could sign a data agreement with Trust. It's called Trust, T-R-V-S-T, but pronounced Trust. And so the manufacturers could sign the agreement. They could exchange the information, the data, so that's the serialization data and lot level data. And then Trust would be able to then coordinate with the national systems. So in Rwanda and in Nigeria, they already have a national system, so it's a matter of just connecting through. There is an app that's available for countries that don't really have that sort of data potential yet, but it's been running for 3 years now, and it's now going to be expanded to other medicines, primarily those that are purchased in the donor-supported market, so antiretrovirals for HIV. Controlled medicines in Nigeria is another. So it's something that has been a very good way to support the actual initialization of traceability at the global level. A lot of people had, like I said, national systems, but then products moving between countries. And that's a very interesting project. And if anyone's interested, I can put you in touch with Max Kabaliza from UNICEF. So in terms of what are some of the other resources we have on traceability, Lee already mentioned the WHO member state mechanism on SF medical products. This is our heart and soul. We have our big plenary meeting coming up in about 2 weeks. It's normally the third week of November. And it's really a platform for member states to work together. The member states lead this mechanism. They are the ones that chair it. We have 2 vice chairs per region, and Korea is one of those vice chairs. And we work together to look at the priorities to prevent, detect and respond to SF. So we do have a working group on traceability, which I support Nigeria, who is the working group chair. We also have working group on detection technologies, and Montenegro is the chair. We have a working group on internet sales, informal markets. The list goes on. We actually have 9 at the moment working groups. So we encourage member states to be actively involved. We realise the time zone is sometimes not so nice. We try to always have these meetings around noon European time, so people in Asia Pacific, maybe you need to log on after you've had your dinner. But these are really important ways for member states to be able to engage in the work we do and to suggest other resources that might need to be created. One of the main resources that the working group did establish was the WHO policy paper on traceability of medical products. It was kind of really the first promulgation, I might say that's, promulgation is maybe not the right word, but the first time that WHO, we sort of sat down and really just documented some of the basic principles of traceability. A lot of people just think of it as, oh, it's just barcodes, isn't it? So, well, no, there's actually a lot more to it. So it's a fairly short paper, but I think it's just the start of the work that we do, and I'll describe it in a bit more detail in a second. We also have some work that we did through COVID-19, where again we were looking, people were asking us, what should we do with barcodes, QR codes, vaccine vial monitors? So there's a little bit of a recommendations we made for at that point in time. And we're also working on having a global notification system for shortages of medicines and vaccines, which I think is important for traceability. So in terms of the policy paper, this is the cover. It's available in the 6 UN languages, of which from this side of the world, Chinese would be the only other language, not in Korean, I'm sorry. As we say, this is just a really high-level policy paper. It doesn't dig deep into how you do traceability per se, but it's really encouraging member states to make sure you have good governance. As I sort of mentioned before, some of the mixed stakeholder models are really great because they can ensure resources and sustainability. But you therefore have to have a really well-structured governance model to make sure each stakeholder understands what their role might be. Including in costing and sustainability at the start. I mentioned trust. I mentioned some of the other agencies that are interested. They might come and say, oh, we'd like to do traceability for this. It's like, okay, well, let's just think of that as part of the sustainability moving forward, because maybe you can only support for 3 to 5 years. This is something we want to live on. So making sure that understanding the costs, and that might mean then that you just phase the implementation. Start with your higher risk products, but understand what it's going to cost and then how you'd add on. And lastly, this really important piece of using internationally recognised standards for your product ID, your data capture and exchange. So one activity that we do have coming up related to traceability and the member state mechanism is on the 7th of November. We're going to hold a technical briefing session, and this is on the topic of traceability, of using global and national standards. We held a technical briefing session last year as well, and what we're doing is looking at the different themes. Last time we looked at governance and funding, and now we're looking at the use of the standards. And that's on the 7th of November at 11 o'clock Central European time. And so we hope that some or all of you may be able to attend that, and you can hear a little bit about the member states' experiences with implementing the standards. So this is probably my last slide, I would say, if it says takeaway, I think so. So I hope that you've recognised here that WHO really wants to make sure that traceability is very much related to the regulation of medical products. We understand it's important for supply chain integrity, and often supply chain can be a little bit separate from regulation, but we see them as interacting with each other. We want to make sure that regulators understand well traceability, so that if they're implementing traceability systems, that it can be something that promotes the safe exchange and sale of products across borders, but at the same time is able to detect if there's substandard falsified medical products. Really important to use internationally recognised standards. We know that there are many suppliers and vendors that are interested in this space, and so it's really important to make sure that they do have a solution that would allow for the barcodes or whatever it might be, the data carrier, to be able to be used across countries and to be interoperable. Otherwise, that really does affect the ability for imports and exports. Ensuring readiness and planning for capacity building. A lot of countries really want to work on traceability, but often it's not something that's well understood by all the stakeholders. So if you're a pharmacist in Europe, for example, you now need to scan every single packet of prescription medicine as you give it to the patient. And what happens if it flags a signal and says, do not dispense, there's a flag here? What do you do? The patient is standing there, or maybe it's the mother who has the child, or the father that has the child there. And what do you do? And so I think really making sure that everybody who is a user of traceability systems in the supply chain, and I do come back to this, the community, the patients, making sure they're aware of what it means. And you might need to say, actually, this is just flagged in the system. I'll just see if I've got another box. If you don't say, look, we really need to check on this, and can you come back tomorrow or the next day, or rather than providing that pack. And I think that's something in Europe they've seen. Some of the lessons I've kind of learned is like you need to have a strategy for how to deal with that. And I've just put a little bit there about phased implementation. I think it's really important. There are various ways that you can do it, but I think really thinking starting one building block and then adding on over time is a really great way to think about it. And that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, anyone has a question? Anybody? I do have one question. Yes. It says that, Can you comment more on the most recent innovative handheld detection technologies for SSF medical products that WHO is assessing and new or upcoming WHO recommendations on effective approaches in this regard? Can you answer that, please?
Yeah, sure, I can. We're going to develop some guidance on how to select and use detection technologies, and with a main emphasis on those that are more handheld or can be used in the field. So we've just recruited a consultant, and we're actually just about to start the work. So I expect through 2025 will be a very busy time for us. We will not actually be reviewing the devices themselves. We'll be using peer-reviewed literature and other forms of data to be able to, we have a WHO guideline development process, and so we have a range of processes we need to follow. But the idea is that, we'll provide information about really what's available, some of the advantages and disadvantages, but also looking to the future of like an ideal device. Perhaps it doesn't quite exist yet, so that will be a signal to the developers of detection devices. And just also to say, we have been doing a little bit of work specifically on detection devices for DEG, so diethylene glycol, ethylene glycol contamination, and we're working on a target product profile for that particular kind of device. That will be published, I'm hoping in March or April next year, so that's a subset.
All right.
Thank you.